You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is everything you need to know before the new series, Alien Earth. Now, outside of the crossover movies with Predator, every movie in the Alien franchise takes place in the future. Prometheus kicks off our first look at that future in the year 2089, and we can safely say that this isn't quite the future that Tomorrowland had predicted. The world is going to the brink of environmental collapse after it's essentially been taken over by giant megacorporations.
It's a metaphor for capitalism.
The most prominent is Weyland Corp, which makes their CEO, Peter Weyland, one of the most powerful men on the planet. Peter is obsessed with immortality, which leads him to fund the expedition of the research vessel Prometheus to the distant moon LV-223, after some archaeologists, led by Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, find an ancient star map in a Scottish cave that they believe to be connected to the engineers. Or what's so special about Scottish mechanics? No, Doug, these aren't human engineers, they're ancient aliens who are not only related to humans, but supposedly created humans, as well as all other life throughout the galaxy. After hearing about the potential significance of this discovery, Peter finances the expedition to investigate further. So, to embark on their journey, the researchers must enter cryostasis, freezing their bodies into a hibernated state for 3 years. To ensure the ship makes it there while the crew's out cold, Peter sends his personal synthetic, David, to keep an eye on the ship and its crew. He's do you say what now? A synthetic, or a synthetic human. They are androids with artificial skin and organs to make them look human, and they are a core aspect to the franchise. They've been the antagonists just as much as the Xenomorphs have been, and in some ways they're even worse. They're not just biologically inhuman, but emotionally as well. They value scientific discovery and corporate advancement over human lives, and David is probably the best example of this. What makes Alien stand out from a lot of other sci-fi franchises is the details that they put into this future. Like, this is a time period when corporations literally ruled the world, and they use their wealth to control how people think. In every movie, we see Weyland-Yutani using secrecy and misinformation to place ordinary people in danger. And let's face it, we also live in an age of misinformation, where we never know what kind of corporate propaganda is driving and paying for the news that we consume. The internet has been flooded with fake news, and you just don't know who to trust. Most mainstream media sites have what's called a profit bias, so the news that you get to see is curated by a corporation that just wants to get you engaged and angry enough to confirm your existing bias so you'll stick around and watch their ads. And that's why, if you want to cut through the bias and hear the real news, I recommend Ground News. They're the sponsor of this video. Ground News is an app and website that gathers related articles from across the world into one place. But they give you the context about the source's political leaning, their reliability, and most importantly, their ownership. This means that you can see through the bias and think critically about the news you consume. For instance, here's a story that I saw about Trump supporter Peter Navarro recommending the president for the Nobel Prize in Economics. You can see sources on the right, including phrases like deserves the Nobel Prize, while sources on the left called Navarro a sycophant, a hack, and called Trump the Taco King. I can see how many sources reported on this story, how many of them lean left or right, and like I said, most importantly, who owns those news sources. That way, I know who has an angle in telling the story a certain way. And I also want to know that the news isn't trying to sway me one way or the other. So Ground News even has a blind spot section that shows you news stories that both sides are ignoring. Here's a story that only got one report from the right about Georgia elections being illegally influenced by a super PAC that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. Or there's this story about Nancy Pelosi proposing a ban on politicians trading stocks that got way more attention from right-wing outlets because Nancy Pelosi trades a lot of stocks. Using this feature helps to give me a better rounded view of all the news and not just the news that supports my existing bias. Ground News is an incredible resource, and I've been looking for a service like this for years, so I highly encourage you to check them out. If you go to ground.news/SC or click this QR code, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every feature. Your subscription will not only help out this channel, but you'll also be supporting an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, when they finally land on LV-223, they discover a temple full of dead engineer bodies, giant statue heads, and jars full of mysterious black goo. After Shaw grabs a sample from one of the bodies, the team is forced to retreat back to the ship after an oncoming sandstorm. But David manages to bring a sample of the goo back to the ship. So he ends up slipping the goo into Shaw's boyfriend's drink just before the couple gets into a passionate exchange in their living quarters. Now, after this fertility boost from David's little helper, Shaw wakes up 6 months pregnant pregnant despite previously being infertile. Seeing that as a bit of a medical red flag, she gets an emergency sonogram and discovers a massive squid-like creature inside of her. They immediately remove it, but it escapes. This discovery is enough to wake up Peter Weyland, who has been secretly sneaked on board, hiding on the ship and kept in cryostasis the whole time. Turns out he knows all about the engineers and wants to ask them how they achieve immortal life. One of the crew members has a bad run-in with the black goo, causing them to mutate and attack the rest of the crew. Afterwards, they finally figure out that the structure is an abandoned military base that wiped out the engineers after a biological weapon went rampant. In order to learn more, David tries to awaken one of the sleeping engineers that he found deep within the structure. However, this ancient alien wakes up on the wrong side of the hibernation pod and rips David's head off before trying to attack the rest of the team. Now, this not only takes out Weyland, but pretty much everyone else outside of Shaw and Janik, the ship's captain. As the engineer tries to take off in the spacecraft, Janik rams the Prometheus into the side of it, causing both of them to be grounded. Shaw manages to make it out on a lifeboat, only to find out that the engineer survived as well. However, when she unceremoniously introduces the engineer to her aesthetically challenged offspring, the sixth Starro from hell engulfs the engineer like a giant facehugger, and after Shaw is able to get some help from David's abandoned, ripped-off head, they locate another abandoned ship and head off for the engineer's homeworld. The final shot shows us our first step towards the Xenomorph, as a strange alien bursts from the engineer's chest, known as a deacon. Essentially, they're a predecessor to the Xenomorph. Now, the Xenomorphs are predatory parasites that take on aspects of their host, evolving with each generation. The deacon is supposedly the earliest stage of that evolution, but they take a massive leap forward in Alien Covenant. Set nearly a decade later in 2104, 16 years before Alien Earth, a colonization ship named the Covenant is about 7 years away from reaching the planet Origai 6. Now, the ship has thousands of colonists frozen in cryostasis and even more frozen in embryos on board when it gets hit by a massive solar flare. Just like Prometheus, this ship has its own David, literally a synthetic human named Walter, who is a duplicate of David's model, and he's forced to wake the crew early after the flare knocks them off course. After a few technical difficulties result in some incinerated crew members, they get a distress signal from a nearby planet that looks much more inhabitable than Origai 6. Some of the crew is worried that the news is too good to be true, and after they land on the planet, they discover a crash ship of an engineer. And it turns out that yes, this was too good to be true. The planet is full of fungus that contains the mysterious black pathogen from Prometheus, but it's evolved even further, becoming an airborne pathogen that's corrupted the local flora and fauna. This allows it to become airborne when the crew steps on a fungus, and soon a new xenomorph predecessor called the Neomorph starts bursting out of people's chests and attacking the survivors. That's when our unkillable android friend David shows up and saves the day. He's been hard at work since the last movie, and after taking them through a city filled with corpses, he fills them in on the rest of his backstory. He claims that when they landed on the new planet, they released the black goo and destroyed nearly all life on the world, infecting everything. But the story gets a little weirder as one of the remaining Neomorphs invades the temple and he tries to connect with the pseudo-apex predator. He fully exposed himself after he freaks out when one of the crew members takes out the Neomorph. Turns out, he's been experimenting with creating his own life on the new planet ever since he landed. He's the one who created the mass graves they saw on their way in after releasing the pathogen upon his arrival on the new world following the events of Prometheus. After this mass genocide, he continued his Ultron arc as he continued experiments with the pathogen in an attempt to create, quote,
perfect organism,
to be used as a bioweapon to wipe out all organic life. And he's not done experimenting either, as he tricks the last of his crewmates into becoming the latest test subject for the facehugger, leading to the creation of the Predomorph. That's the final predecessor that ends up being the closest we get to the classic creature from the 1979 film. Eventually, Walter goes out looking for the rest of his missing crew when he discovers his doppelganger's work. When Walter confronts him, David finds his hard reset button and chases after the rest of the crew. They manage to slip by him, only to get caught in the crosshairs of the Predomorph. Now, they barely manage to get back on the ship in time, shake off the Predomorph and escape back to the Covenant, only to discover that one of their crew had become infected the next day. Now, there's a loose alien on the ship once again who manages to take out multiple members of the crew before finally being ejected out the back of the ship, just like the original Xenomorph in the first movie. Now, Covenant ends on a twist. As the passengers are being put into stasis, we realize that Walter was actually swapped places with David, who's not only reported to the Weyland Company that the surviving members perished in the solar flare, but he also brought aboard 2 facehugger embryos alongside the surviving human. Now, with the ship's course now reset back to Origai 6, you would think that this is where they would pick up the story, but that would be much too simple for this sprawling franchise.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the creator of Alien Earth, Noah Hawley, who's a genius by the way, he's done Fargo and Legion, he's been very clear about the fact that he's taking his own creative liberties with the series. series. FX Entertainment president Gina Balin made this pretty clear, saying, quote, "Everything doesn't have to fit together the way you expect from Marvel. Fans don't expect that in this universe. It doesn't have the same pressure." And to be fair, they're right. As I said before, Alien hasn't had a complicated history with its canon. I mean, we only talked about Prometheus and Covenant, but technically, the crossover movies with Predator take place earlier in Earth's timeline in the modern day. But since Prometheus essentially retconned that from canon, AVP and its sequel clearly take place in a different universe or timeline.
These timelines are so confusing.
Now that said, we've already seen subtle hints that we may see the Yacha in this series, so anything really is on the table.
Now wait a minute, does that mean we just spent all the time recapping these first two movies for nothing?
No, not necessarily. It seems that Hawley has some very specific complaints about those prequels that he plans to correct. But whatever changes he does make, we can expect him to at least somewhat respect the spirit of the franchise. Most of the critiques that Hawley had of Ridley Scott's sequels were mostly visual, complaining that the series had lost its retrofuturism aspect and traded it for an Apple-like interface. So we can certainly expect the series to return to the classic look that we saw in the late 70s and 80s. However, the biggest narrative changes that he's mentioned are mostly around what the Xenomorphs actually are. Hawley mentioned wanting to move away from the bioweapon idea and lean more into the ultimate life form idea that we see portrayed later in the franchise. The core idea that Ash, the first synthetic villain from the first movie, spoke.
You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism.
Specifically, Hawley stated that he wants to remystify the Xenomorph, with a team of researchers experimenting on 5 different alien life forms, including the facehugger and the Xenomorph, before the ship crashes into Earth and lets them all loose. Hawley also stated that we shouldn't expect these creatures to act like they normally would or have in previous iterations. And given that the series is identifying different stages of the Xenomorph's life cycle as different creatures entirely, it seems like these creatures are going to be combined to create the movie monster that we all know and love. Now, this would be a significant departure from the prequels, as the Xenos were specifically designed, mutated, and perfected by David. That said, even if some details are changed, we shouldn't expect Hawley to abandon everything from those Ridley Scott prequels. The trailers show how many of the central themes, mainly Earth's corporate quest for immortality, seems to be a core element of the series as well. So, whatever changes this series ends up making, we can at least expect them to respect the franchise's core roots.
Oh wait, wouldn't that mean everybody on Earth knows the Xenomorphs exist? I thought they never even heard about him in the first movie.
Well, that's what many fans thought when the series was first announced, but it actually makes more sense if you think about it. In the original 1979 film, Weyland-Yutani seems to know a lot about the Xenomorph than the crew does. After the crew discovers the alien on the Nostromos, we learn from Mother about Special Order 937.
I thought he was a robot. How's he got a mom?
Different kind of mother. Specifically, this is MUTHUR 6000, which is the AI computer system used by Weyland-Yutani to pilot the ship. Specifically, the Order instructed Ash to ensure the specimen was delivered to Earth, even if it cost the lives of the crew.
It's a metaphor for capitalism, Morty. What do you think?
This implies that they had to have known the Xenomorph's value to change their directive so drastically in the middle of a mission. And what we see on Alien Earth could explain exactly what their intentions were with that sample.
If this is a prequel, does that mean we're gonna get some kind of CGI young Sigourney Weaver?
Definitely not. Hawley specifically said that this is not a Ripley story, despite the fact that he's drawing so much inspiration from the films considered to be the Ripley tetralogy. But even without Ripley in the story, there's so much to explore, and FX has gone all in on this series. They've put a massive amount of money into the production of the series, and they fully intend for it to be the next Game of Thrones. Now, it has promising early reviews from the pilot that was shown at San Diego Comic-Con, so it seems like longtime fans of the series are in for a real treat, even if everything we see doesn't exactly line up with the previously established canon. But guys, that's everything you need to know before you tune into FX's Alien Earth. What do you think about the director's changes? Are there any important details we missed? Big shout out to the writer of this video, Dodd Seitz. You can find his social links below. And let me know what you think down in the comments, or at me on Twitter, Blue Sky Threads, or on our free-to-join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.